Submarine Beast turned foe.
Document
All rights
content.
reserved 2023. Eli James. This
Check
is part 4 of 4.
accessibility. Yes, sir. It's time, then. Less officially while assessing the invisible path separating his hand. Somewhat trembling. And the key lodged behind the glass plunged into the console. My brothers, we know that mistakes have happened. Whatever happens here alongside the martyrs, maybe we shall see each other and them soon.
If they leave the
Quote
power
end.
grid alone, it'll probably all
Leaning
go in
into
on
his
this
shoulders.
take. 4 of 4.
Wincing and growing terribly resigned to task
pertaining to the
suddenly as
writing.
though he were in the
All music's
submarine alone. Mustered he a strangulated cry when cried he, quote 10 seconds, before.
If you'd like to
Allah
invest
Akbar.
in this production 70,
Quote
feel free to reach me.
bloody
412-683-1294.
A fourth man in had some 30 yards away from the Doom
Eli
Committee
James,
stood to his feet
non-collaborative
before he
right
struck.
at gmail.com.
Blood immediately pouring from the top and rear of the lieutenant's head while the man staring intently at the radar screen. Waiting for his mate's wrist turn. Pulled away and
Certain
jettisoned
words
to his
are
feet.
missing from here. Certain
His arms
words,
spread
like
wide
corpse.
as he hunkered to the ground and with panic
The
etched in
scene that
features
they're
feverishly
standing
gaze
over,
around
fighting
him.
over, is
Toward the
missing.
disturbance and
That's coming
beyond
right
before
back. I
with
got it
more
printed
wherewithal
out.
maneuvering definitively just in time to duck a wild overhead blow. The cold steel catching the overhead flashing glint emanating from a suspending light. And in his mind's eye the blade of an axe was in an abbreviated circular bow pattern was cutting coarsely toward him. Dead set on its target before a dexterous roundhouse kick served as piston violently sending the lieutenant hard against a remercelli panel that ripped away from flimsy moorings. The shattering clamor sounding before the strong U.S. attacker found his feet again. Both men slamming remorselessly hard against the ground.
Oh, that's an error there.
Nervously the third man watched on, bearing the brunt of an angry glare for becoming like the deer in headlights, irredeemably hogtied and not engaging to assist. The clock ticked down to 30 seconds remaining when the man in hysterics returned on slipping feet to the launching console as the American in the same lightning strike of a second was pinned by a boot at the neck after the Iranian seemed to miraculously find his feet. Pulling himself up with a shout by pulling down with both hands on both the lever and valve auspiciously to his quick summation calling to him.
They massacred
Finding the red wrench
crew.
that had made like a hockey puck before he
And,
with the rear
that
of his
part
boot
seemed to
managed to
disappear
kick
from
at
the
it and was
script.
able to,
While I was
to
sitting
the
here.
shocked oblivion of the defending Iranian, secure the steel object standing out remarkably from the drab of flooring matching the panels there and the very shadows convening in that
They're on a
area of the
submarine.
submarine that itself reeked of a welder's shop and nose-clotting metal set abrasively to a grinding wheel. If this man should live, it wouldn't be to have the children. The thought could have in a flash registered while the Iranian doubled over in excruciating commission-squelching pain. Not as though unexpectedly and surgically neutered or even blitzed from behind, but in reeling mind-throttling agony. It was more like under an anesthetic he'd been tipped over from behind. Impervious to any shorn tendons, abandon once stitching together his gravitational center of strength. To the full brunt of impact resigning himself yet. Within 5 or 6 seconds the target. Eyeing up his man and switching his gaze to the console and making a firm determination. He made it upright again as though successive pain-riddled motions to propel himself. Our American with suppressed breath returned his leg to assist in crawling to his feet. Making a similar determination when he blitzed him. A full throttle sacrifice all burst in a beeline toward the panicking man with his hand on the key. His petrified eyes switching between 3 objects. A laminated manual guide hanging by a chain by the console's main launching area. While gasping for what he'd intended as a final breath, he watched the freight train throttling toward him while still the lieutenant. Making it to his feet only much quicker than had he fallen. Less inebriated but as though quickened and shocked out of any former abandoning of equilibrium. In slow motion, eyes up the flashing green light that unervingly flickered over the storming U.S. man's shoulder. Green light suddenly framed within a border of distressed blue lights that had only meant one thing. The threshold encasing the point of no return had been crossed.
Can't control that.
From the console, and wearing an intense grimace like a tattoo and conceivably forever embedded against a newly transformed face, the American who'd been drenched in sweat flashed angry wide-eyed glances at the awaiting man up against his own window of closing time, as one of two things could occur at this point. determining on whom precisely danger should fall. With blue veins at neck region fiercely pumping, and for the briefest second a man enduring a gunshot to the abdomen seemed to lose himself, as had his target beheld him in a disorienting haze that was same pursuer's wobbly yet pulsating silhouette before. Quickly halting and hunching perpendicular from waist hinge, crooked angularly lateral to the ground, he with the crown of his head facing the man at the console shook the woos off and through clenching teeth said as if to revive himself, "Let's roll. Let's roll. Let's roll," with volume reaching into the stratosphere on the final word, making a distant memory out of what he'd breathed to himself. And with considerable force he continued onward, making like a runaway locomotive and beeline toward the man, with a shattering guttural echoing throughout the sub's corridor and stretches of hall. The skin to the knuckles of the tan-skinned man's hands growing taut and dissipated of color as the key seemed to of its own accord vibrate in his trembling hand. The thought that it would be both his most important and final key turned flittered on vulture-like wings of rapacious fury through his mind. More like an impulse on the second, he reflexively screamed his own desperate shout, impulsively stretching with one arm as the support to the one supporting the key turning hand, and "Don't. You two will have no way out," quote, was the American's barely discernible cry buried beneath layers of rage, who'd instead of planning to reason with him knew that before he'd tripped over an unseen body's boot, a crushing one-time mortal thrust and impact was required here. And in response, twice shouted and once abbreviated with words too garbled to discern, it was the man at the console's turn to sound a final shrill cry. "Allah Akbar." The brown-skinned man shrilly shrieked through the cabin as the attacking soldier, a strong and agile heavyweight to his welter dash, finally without apprehension or question dodged at him in a final leap. The attacking, resigning himself to at least two shade forms of irreversible doom and less on prospect of scoring a throng of virgins, fixed his affrighted eyes of strangulated composure on his hand one last time, absurdly leaning into the key as if on an instant thinking extra force might be required, and switching his hand severely on an angle before the collision occurred, with his eyes shut as though sealed with a burning iron while pushing his free hand's shoulder to touch the cold panel, hugging the metal console panel. The man firmly espousing both a belief in conserving state funds and that, in some instance, capital punishment is a feasible means to an end and way forward. The earth rocked literally to the core, both longitudinally and lat dash. Spewed rivers of inferno in fresh lava out of its mouth and from bleeding ulcers as she under at least one of appointed conditions on those being fulfilled on the hour. I don't know what I said there. Quote, judgments of men against men and similar to God against men. Judgments appointed to the time of the consummation of late Earth's final 7 years of consummate of common time, and of the conditions burdens yet ahead. We behold these distinctly by and as either God's judgment hand against man or man's on man. It's the later. From closer to the onset of this fated week we see the assaults of doomsaying men and some sort of vengeance and vendetta form in their hour as executors self-appointed would make like God and raise hell on the heads of certain enemies, and one instance we in the scriptures hear the advanced warning of God who warns men to
That's some mistakes
come out of her,
regarding
my people,
type errors,
lest she partake in her sins. Again our topic matter, finally the prophesied Babylon. Are there swear that in one instance of unhinged fury we see what some say is scarcely a cleansing for doing evil into a purification, but we see what persons believe is a deserve a judgment for grave evils committed. Although God is in sane estimation said to be something other than author of this judgment, he does not intervene,
in his same
as he has for his people Israel. And very recently, at this late hour, however, and conversely, shall we see a nation vindicated yet again for evils committed against her? One again committed great evil, yet he attacked the nation who was given the final word as valiantly she defended in conquered persons in militia responsible. What shall become of Yagaj Koj Katak Hussein and his conglomerate 10 representing his king heads of the various Middle Eastern peoples? Will God stand again for the nation quick on a former day to demonstrably befriend the nation of Israel? His chosen people enduring the afflictions and valiantly in defense
And it's
acting
heavy
in
on a
fierce
former day.
retribution alongside much of the world not on Nasser's puppet strings. Had the Admiral's chief lieutenant acted in time against America's attacker with hand on the key and that submarine ready to launch? Person said she has little right to farewell America. For the nature of her quote-unquote debauchery and bloodshed and crimes against self. And not to mention those against the nations abroad. And of even those persons still loving her even after severing alliance and ties with Israel. They said it was beyond a night that she should continue to swiftly intervene as a menace of a kind by acting for the world under the imposition of not right but responsibility. In fact, it was dual citizen Joel who said to an ardent defender against all things America, "She doesn't have the right to farewell." You are correct. She has the moral responsibility to farewell for the good of us all. However, patriotism on any portion of the world during these hours was a wounded beast, and if such was your only hope and reliance and way by which one felt alive or not, then I didn't finish that. The former United States president unseated looked out of the window of his charter jet. The place that was his appointed former home a safe distance below him and in the center of the mayhem of flames and engulfing rage. Much of the city is the world seeing the liquid lava form of rebuke taking over many a dry land portion of the eastern world, finding another outlet here in USA. Grieved another grief to his soul and knowing, just knowing, that another attack would be unable to be avoided, which is why he'd been escorted by former cabinet and military members and officials to board the jet. The Admiral's man had to the revived terror of New York and much of the distraught world with vested interest. He had the last say before the submarine to the depths of the ocean floor did sink with no surviving body to fitting any definition of the word provide testimony to the final minutes there. It was another harrowing countdown from a military commander post in New York with daring officials as hangers on giving a report to any ears still able to hear and listen and take instruction. Former President Benson said, quote, "The only survivors, I'm afraid, are the person who have already made it beneath,
Persons.
I repeat beneath, ground, or who have flown out of harm's way already. Still I say to those hearing my voice, run for cover if you're able to. Friends, run for deep cover and may God go with you wherever you flee and show you during your new long stay home before some sense of normalcy can creep in. I know the nuke warheads en route, as some of you know, and she's overland in fast en route to New York.
That was a
The
rumor.
aftermath and cold winter shall be extended and unbearable. And just maybe the prophets were right who said the Lord comes to put an end to all of these woes. Which isn't to say that the affliction until then such as this portended does not meet and design our fate. I watched from overhead in DC, my former home, as parts of the nation sow the blaze which seemed to gather there. She is a deep
I ain't
hole
sure.
in ground filled with fire and matching the terrible sight of what we see in fault line ruptures filled with volcanic lava distressing the earth. The impact with the city is
There ain't
mere
no the
moments
blaze
away.
about it, Glenn.
Run while you can and to subway stations and underground, and do share your gear with your neighbors, those of you with masks and items besides. God save us all who live and receive those who have passed on. Comfort the afflicted, Lord. And all of us do the same. Go. Get beneath ground. Others will also survive to help and commission others to rebuild. As though compelled to and to act in accordance with the soul burning inside. Now go. Go. The good people still on our continent shall rebuild in time with the likes of Hussein swept off of the planet. This signal won't last and, quote. And just like that the snowy white lines horizontally slanted against many
You have to
television
read that
sets.
paragraph. I don't think I'm going to make
Before
it
he could
through
complete
the
the address
paragraph
heard by a few persons.
before 15 minutes.
Wondering if not sure Hussein was himself watching. Instinct had instructed them to dodge for cover.
All right,
As
to
a
reserve
certain
delay,
doom
James
felt inevitable during
2023.
a sickly quiet that was never
Production is
before
titled
experienced.
70.
Before the mushroom cloud lifted, it was seen inside of the mind's eye as
Today
spirits
is
sink to the
March
lowest
1st,
depths of despair.
2024.
And President Benson,
Good day, good night.
former, he wasn't